Welcome to the Food Startups Podcast, connecting the opaque world of food startups.
This is Daniel Emery Sitanayaka of Tiny Farms, and you are listening to the Food Startups Podcast.
He has spent his career helping businesses improve. His background includes consulting, launching an independent restaurant group, investing in hospitality and technology businesses, chairing a nonprofit organization, and serving as the CFO of a publicly traded technology company. He is a perpetual builder, operator, and problem solver with a passion for small business. He has built companies, bought businesses, invested in businesses, transformed organizations, and designed new products. He's been doing this for pretty much his whole life, as you'll find out today. And most recently, he helped launch Orderly to address the fact that independent restaurants were being left behind by technology, and it was time for a change. Mark Haidet, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Matt, especially after that introduction. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thanks to Joy, your colleague. She did a great job getting all the info there. And I really liked reading your story, Mark. So you grew up, I believe, near the University of Miami in Ohio in a college town, correct?
That's right.
Right. And so for a long time, all right, so it's really interesting to me because I guess I had a little bit, but not nearly as much as you did. Like, you always had like a business mind. I think your parents had a little bit to do with that, but can you tell us a little about middle school, high school, your entrepreneurial and business ventures, how you developed that business mind?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's you don't think about it when you're growing up, but then you look back and you realize some of the influences. And, as I grew up, my parents kind of had their hands in lots of different things. They would, have, we lived on a kind of a farm and had a lot of gardens and things like that. So we'd sell produce in the front yard, and we'd do all sorts of things to make a little extra money. We, came from a family of four, didn't have a ton of money, and we were always kind of hustling to get a little bit more. And my dad worked at Miami University and had a lot of opportunities for us to have part-time jobs growing up. We would work in concession stands at sporting events, at summer school camps, and cut grass where we could and that sort of thing. So there were just lots of exposure to doing things to make a little extra money. And I guess that just kind of gets in your DNA after a while, and you realize, hey, there's a job to be done. I can go do it and make some money and then leverage that into the next thing. And for some reason, when I was young, I also started getting exposed to investing and was able to invest a little bit in a few, small stocks, tiny amount of money in a few stocks, just because I thought it was interesting, and tracked those, and then eventually invested more as I went. Anytime I earned a little money, I put it aside, and my brothers would make fun of me for hoarding my money, but I'd kept it in an old cigar box and then, find a way to invest it into something else and turn it into something bigger. And I kind of liked that process of making money and then turn it into something a little bit bigger and invest in it and trying to make more money. And it's kind of how I applied things as I grew up, trying to get more experiences to learn, more opportunities to invest, and then, really work hard to try to get ahead.
That's great. And Mark, so it's like instilling this kind of mindset. Do you today? All right. So I know a lot of entrepreneurs that used to invest in stocks, but now they only invest in their own businesses. Are you still in the stock market?
I am in the stock market. I'll call it passively. So I have some retirement funds that are invested with a company that manages them in a fairly conservative approach. And my aggressive high-risk investments are all things that I have my own hands in. Being part of a public company and seeing that whole process, I realize there's a whole lot that, goes on within a company that the rest of the world doesn't understand. So trying to be the person that figures out what company is going to do well and not do well, I learned is probably as much luck as anything else. And so I think of stock market investments in many ways as riskier than you might guess, although there's always an opportunity to make money there. And then there's the more conservative plays like investing in a GE where they pay a nice dividend and their business is fairly diversified. Those are stable type, solid return investments. But as far as trying to make a lot of money on the stock market, that's not my thing. I rather do it where I can control and understand the risks and the variables and control some of the outcomes as much as possible.
Right. And I've heard from people that are like experienced investors. I'm not one of them, but what they've told me, they're like, listen, if you can, and you have to count, the down years as well. If you overall over a span of 20 years make 8% a year, that's really, really good. But for someone who's trying to start a business with not that much capital, let's say they only have 10, 20K in the bank or even 50K, 8% really, it's not enough to just live on that alone. Right. And okay. So Mark, so moving on from stocks. Okay. So a great quote I got from your bio, I look at my losses as great lessons, and they take the place of the MBA I never got. And this is actually pretty common. I've heard this from a lot of people. I've said a similar thing. We've all had some failed ventures. It's part of the game, right? What are some of the greatest lessons you've learned from some of if you want to, share a little bit about maybe one of the things you've done that hadn't worked out?
Well, I'd say, and the quote about the failures being the cost of my MBA is a little bit of rationalization to my wife about when I have lost money. I can say, well, I never went and got that MBA, so let's just put this against that.
But Mark, to add to that, though, I know you say it's a rationalization, but I think you have a point because, how much does the MBA cost? Like $100,000 or more? So if you look at it that way, I think your experiences probably, investing and running it yourself is way different than sitting in a classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think in, a couple of the early, I got lucky early on a couple of things where I invested and was able to, parlay that into the next thing. And then there were one or two where I wasn't so lucky. And, when you look back on it and you realize why, part of it is you can go back and say, my gut kind of told me there was an issue there and I didn't listen and I got talked into or sold something. So, that was one of the bigger earlier lessons to me is that to start to trust your gut and your instinct when it comes to ventures and investments and, number one. And then number two is to not assume that you know or understand everything that you invest in. And it really takes a lot of work to understand it. And I've worked with a lot of people that wanted to get into businesses or, open different types of shops or locations. And there's a lot that goes into figuring out what's right and what's wrong and what kind of volume you need and the kind of business that, needs to generate the returns to make it all worth your while. And you start to understand that more as you are involved in more businesses and see more things. And, so some of the successes help you understand that, but some of the failures do as well, because you see what, maybe some of the assumptions that you had going in that didn't pan out, and how could you have validated that better on the front end or questioned your assumptions better on the front end. So that's where I think, going through a process, whether you fail or succeed, you're going to learn a tremendous amount, and particularly starting a business or working in an early stage business where you get your arms around every aspect of the operation. That's something that made me interested in restaurants is when you're managing or owning a restaurant, it is a full end-to-end business that includes everything, including a production facility. So it's, people don't think of restaurants as manufacturing, but they're small manufacturing facilities. And you have all the issues of manufacturing and all the issues of sales and marketing and all the management of employees and labor, and you've got the full gamut. So one, it's a great experience to get your arms around all that. Two, going into it, you need to know that you have to do all those things and understand them. So that's something I think people don't think about when they get into a restaurant.
I'll tell you one thing that helps increase my respect. It scares me a little bit of the restaurant business. I've seen, I remember just being a regular at a number of restaurants in different cities, in DC, in South America, in Houston, Texas, where, I loved it. I was like, telling everyone you have to go there. And then I find out 3 months later they closed down. And I was like, wow, this restaurant was awesome. How did they not succeed? Restaurant is really, really, really tough. And we're going to talk about the restaurants you open. And what I find interesting is a lot of people when they're, you mentioned the person that's maybe doing their MBA or thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, right? And they're scared to make that jump, either to go from a fixed salary to zero, or how to make that transition, or can they make a transition with a full-time job when they don't have, are they going to have enough time and bandwidth, et cetera, et cetera. And then you could also talk about incentives. But you were in the corporate world, correct? While you decided to open the restaurant.
Yeah, that's right. For a number of years, a lot of people had said, well, you ought to open a restaurant. You seem to really like to entertain and you like to cook. And my pat answer back was, I might open a restaurant one day, but only when I don't need to make money from owning a restaurant, because I've just seen too many people work too hard and get, in essence, trapped in a restaurant where they're not making money, but they've got a lot of obligations and liabilities. So I always kind of said, yeah, I'd be interested in doing it, but I'm not doing it until I don't need the income from a restaurant. So I was fortunate enough to be in a position at Radiant Systems where I was a CFO. I had a very stable job and a nice income, and was able to meet an operator who, was able to run the restaurant from day to day. And so my involvement in literally the conversation I had with Thomas Lee, my restaurant partner, was, look, you want to grow your business. I want to learn more about restaurants and I'm happy to help you. And even if we don't end up doing something together in a restaurant, I'd love to just listen to your story and understand your business plan and help you think about it. And, the best outcome is we do something together and it's successful. And if not, at least I'll have learned something about an area I was interested in learning. And hopefully you've gotten some help on the business side of it. And that's how I approached it. And we worked together and developed a good relationship. And it was something I could do, on nights and weekends, and was able to help him kind of craft the business side of the restaurant and to help capitalize it between myself and some other guys that I worked with at Radiant to invest in it. And it worked out that it was nice that it was complementary with the job I was in. Radiant Systems was a great technology company that served restaurants and retailers. And so it was, beneficial for me as an executive in that company to learn more and understand more, be closer to and more empathetic with the customers that we serve. And I've always believed that's critical and important, is to not get too far away from the customer. I started my career at Radiant spending 6 or 7 years working directly with customers. And when I became the CFO, with more and more regulation from the SEC and just the bigger scale of the business, ultimately becoming a $400 million public company, the CFO role became more and more detached from the customer. So the opportunity to firsthand be an operator and still be in that position was very unique, because it really helped both sides of my business career, both on the Radiant side as well as an operator.
Amazing. And so you still have, it's called Hand Cooked Taqueria. So you guys still have the restaurant today. And then so now you have the restaurant more kind of, I don't want to say passive income. I know it's a restaurant, but way more passive than Orderly, which is your chief project right now. And before we introduce Orderly, I'd like to mention an article about your company in the Washington Post. And I think this kind of sums up the problem, right? Because any business has to solve a problem, a theme that we touch in all of the episodes. And listeners, you can find this episode at foodstartupspodcast.com/orderly. Now, in the Washington Post article, which is also linked, until recently, it took 10 phone calls to 10 different vendors to order a week's worth of food and supplies for District Taco's 4 locations. So to me, that's really powerful because, all right, so District Taco in DC, I've been there. It's great, but we're not talking like Chili's. It's not a big chain, but for just 7 days, 10 phone calls, and time is a scarce commodity when you're running a restaurant. So, that's where Orderly comes in, right? So, Mark, I wasn't, looking so much to pitch your company, not because I, didn't want to, but I thought, people could read about it online. But the problem that you guys are solving is really interesting, right? Because as you mentioned, like recipes, the cooking process, how things are marinated, served, the way the waiter interacts, the way the hostess interacts, et cetera, et cetera. Everything is like systemic, right? You have to follow processes to be successful. Yet you found that purchasing in a restaurant is not systemic.
Yeah, so when we founded Orderly, we really were trying to solve 2 things. One, we immediately saw, and I saw from my own restaurant, the whole process around food management is very old school. The whole purchasing process and the inventory process in an independent restaurant. Now, separate from a large chain who, we're not focused on. We focus on the small guy, the 1 to 20 site operator. They're building their business, they're growing, but they don't have time. They don't have time to think. They're reacting. Every bit of time that they have is spent with customers on food preparation, hopefully on coaching employees, and they're not going to have the extra time to build world-class processes and technology around their supply chain and procurement process. They're just happy to get enough product in to make the food they need to make, and the idea of spending extra time to try to optimize that just isn't there, and oftentimes the skill set's not there. It's one of those processes in a manufacturing facility that you've got dedicated resources to, and in a restaurant you just don't. So we set out to solve the problem of let's just make it easier for restaurants to order and to get visibility into their costs and their data so that they can save money, because those are really the 2 precious commodities in a restaurant, time and money. And in doing that, we kind of came to this theme of we really just want to help them get their shit in order, basically, right? It's a crazy business, and they need to get things in order so that they can do it well, do it consistently, and make money. And that oftentimes is what separates the profit margins of the chains with the independents, which is their ability, to operate more efficiently, have more buying leverage, all those great things. Some of that's not available to an independent restaurant, but much of it is. But what we saw was the technology wasn't there to support them. Most of the technology providers in the industry, myself included, when I was with Radiant, were focused on the larger chains. And that's where the big money was. And that's where we built products. And then we always try to take them down market because 60% of the market is made by independents. So it was always the idea of, gee, we ought to take this and simplify it and sell it to independent restaurants. But it's always hard to take complexity and simplify it. So with Orderly, we decided, let's just start from the basics, keep it simple, and only sell to independent restaurants to keep the product as simple as possible, making it as usable as possible so that restaurants that spend their hard-earned dollar on technology are assured of getting a return. And they're not going to spend thousands of dollars on something that they can't use at the end of the day because it's too complicated. So, we sell on a monthly subscription. They pay as they go. The return is immediate. They don't have a bunch of upfront costs, and it's technology that's simple enough to pick up, to use it on your phone, a tablet, a computer, and walk yourself through it without, thousands of dollars of training and implementation costs.
Okay. And Mark, I want to ask you something based on what you're talking about. To me, not being in the restaurant business or owning a restaurant, the benefits seem pretty obvious, right? But, we're all resistant to change, right? And so I feel like if I own, a pair of franchises, someone's calling me and says, oh, it's Orderly or Get Orderly's calling me. Besides just resistance to change, what resistance do you see during the sales process to these restaurants?
Yeah, so resistance to change is a big issue because people get in a comfort zone and they don't want to risk changing that, even if they know that there's a benefit from it, right? So that's where we have to make it super simple and make things feel as common and comfortable as possible. But that's always a barrier. As far as other barriers, I would say in the sales process, it's the fact that the restaurant isn't necessarily looking for our product. They have a need, but they don't necessarily know there's a solution. So when you're out selling a point of sale solution, right, the restaurant knows I'm opening a new restaurant. I have to have something to ring up my guests. I'm going to go out and look for it. I'm going to look at different providers and I'm going to make a selection. For our solution, they may know that they have a food cost problem or that they want to make more money or that, there's some inefficiencies in their business, but we're not in a current category necessarily that's out there that somebody's out shopping for. So one of our challenges is in a very short time frame, educating the restaurant on the need and, aligning their pain points with what we do, and then helping them understand that what we offer is a field-tested and proven way for them to get value very quickly with some amount of change, but not tremendous change. And so really that whole education process tied up into a sales process is where the difficulty is because you've got to get a person's attention and then help them understand all this so that they can get to the point of deciding that, I actually do want to go do this. We find it very easy to connect with the customer and align kind of their pain points with what we do because they're very consistent pain points in the industry. The next challenge is really then doing something about it. And frankly, not just the desire to change, but actually taking a few minutes, and literally it can be a few minutes to get the process started. And that's where we see restaurants, because they're so overloaded, if they need to go get us a list of their suppliers and their account numbers and a little bit of data about what they buy so we can get electronic invoices hooked up, if we don't get it right away, it may take weeks because they just don't have time and they don't, they do 10 other things and then they don't get back to it. So that's some of the risk points that we face. The good news, those are all risks that can be overcome with marketing and education and spending time with our customers and helping them understand that as long as you identify with the pain point, which most of them do, helping them understand that there's a solution and it's a solution that's not going to take them a ton of time or money and it's going to have a pretty darn quick payback for them.
Right on. Okay. And so Mark, a question for you, because in the sales process, I'm always flirting with this line of how, if you send someone an email, right? Like Mark, if I have a restaurant, you send me an email, I'm like, oh, great. It's in your inbox, all the information. If I have to do other purchasing or more immediate needs, I'll push that email and I'll put it on the list and it gets slid down and then I never see the email, right? So when you're in the sales process, how do you manage making sure you stay in front of the customer, but not going overboard and kind of being too in your face and annoying them?
Yeah, sales and marketing is a balance, right? So you hit on it, right? We want to reach the customer and we want to make that connection, but we don't want to bug them. And so our cadence for that is we start off, with an email campaign. Well, one, actually, we start off with creating a list of who we think is an appropriate customer. We try not to spam the world. So we look at the profile of customers that we think can get value from our solution. We identify them, we find out everything we can about them, and we research them, and then we reach out to them. And we reach out to them in a very short set of emails over the course of a week or so that just makes them aware that we're here and that we'd love to talk to them to educate them on how they can improve in their food cost. And we get a pretty good response rate from that. And once we've done that for a week or so, and we'll follow up with some phone calls, if they're engaged and they open the emails, and we might ring them if we have the phone number, or let them know that we're here to talk. Our goal really is just to do a discovery call, which is just, hey, tell us some about you. We'll tell you some about us. We can decide together if it sounds like a good fit, if the value proposition's there. If it is, then we'll set up a demo. But we're never going to take more than, a few minutes of your time on the front end until we mutually agree that, it sounds like there's a value proposition for the customer. So we do that to be as educational as possible and not as salesy. And then if we don't make a connection in that first week or so, we just put that customer into a ongoing kind of maintenance communication where we've got blogs. We do a lot of educational pieces to help our customers or the industry learn more about how to manage different aspects of their restaurant. And so we'll start sending them those in a very kind of educational way, not in a salesy way. And then if they're interested, because, they may not have been interested when we sent them an email 3 months ago, but today they looked at their financials that their accountant put together and panicked about food costs just went up on them and they don't know why. And, they might remember our email, or they might have read a recent blog post, and then they contact us. And that's really the goal. We just want them to be educated. And then when they have the need, when they have the time, we're here. Give us a call, send us an email, go online and sign up for a free trial and get your hands on the product and see if it's right for you.
Right on, Mark. Well, listen, I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your sales process. I know I use something called Yesware. There's tons of them, but tracking if someone opens the email is huge because you always have that fear as a salesperson that, it's going to get stuck in spam or promotional email. So it's nice to know when people are reading the emails and, without going over and say, hey, I know you opened my email in Los Angeles, California on your iPhone at 7:12. But, it is nice having that information. Mark, I wanted to finish up here. Do you have any books, 1 to 2 books that have impacted you, that have kind of helped you with your mindset for business over your whole career?
Wow, a lot of books. The funny thing is I'm not a reader, but I read business books. And I look at that as educational, but I'm not a big pleasure reader. But, one that I think is important for anyone in business to read is The Ultimate Question, which is about customer satisfaction. And it really is the whole net promoter concept of, measuring customer satisfaction and understanding whether your customer is a promoter or neutral or a detractor. And, when we were growing Radiant, we had a slump in the business and it was around customer satisfaction. And we re-engineered our business around the customer. And part of that was based on kind of the tenets of that book and how you think about the customer first and kind of everything you do throughout the company. And so that book kind of became a common language for us at Radiant for how we stayed very customer focused and engaged in the difficult conversations with customers to find out what you could do better and then take that back into the company. And so that's a book I recommend to anybody in business. Another one that's restaurant specific, it's been out there for a while, Danny Meyer's book, Setting the Table, was one that when I first started talking to Thomas, my restaurant partner, he told me about that book and I went and read that, and that helped kind of give us a common thought process and language for how we thought about the restaurant. And obviously Danny Meyer's done a pretty darn good job in the restaurant industry. So anyone in the industry should, I think, read that book. But gosh, there's dozens beyond that, but those are a couple that come top of mind.
Great. Well, listen, Mark, I'm sure we can find you at getorderly.com. Thank you so much for coming on today. I learned so much about the restaurant industry and sales, and I appreciate you sharing your story with our audience.
Well, I appreciate it, Matt. Thanks for the opportunity, and appreciate what you're doing to help connect the industry and share information. It's a rapidly changing industry, and I think you're serving a great need by connecting people and getting information out there. We all can do better and help each other.
Exactly. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.